Good afternoon, and good morning, and good evening from wherever you are in the world. My name is Mhlanga. I am currently a committee member of the World Federation of Engineering Organization, and I am also a qualified civil engineer by profession and the current chairperson of the South African Institution of Civil Engineering. Today, we have assembled a panel of speakers from a diverse background to unpack the topic of ethics in engineering. This forms part of our webinar series, Engineering the Future. I would like to dive into the program, and I'm looking forward to this insightful session and to conscientize young people around the world. On the program, I would like to ask our current chairperson, Mr. Firas from World Federation of Engineering Organization, Young Engineers, Future Leaders, to give us a brief introduction, and let's get into this exciting program. Firas.
Good day. Thank you, Michael, for moderating our webinar today. First of all, I would like to say that engineering as a profession is meant to serve the public by strictly adhering to codes of conduct and placing supreme the issues of health, safety, and welfare of public. We can say that ethics is an important topic for engineers of every level and field. And when you become a professional engineer, you are held to a higher standard. As engineers, we are trusted with projects that impact the lives of hundreds of thousands of people. Engineers are always expected to display highest standards of integrity and honesty. They must be fair and open-minded, and they must be willing to implement a degree of specialized behavior that compels them to abide by the topmost principles of ethical conduct. Today's webinar aims to educate mainly and inspire the young engineers and make them aware of the urgency of implementing measures that promote ethical behavior in their organizations and the ethical theories that we use in our ethical decision making, and also to let them know some of the tools that let them identify and resolve ethical conflicts. I'm sure that our panelists today, our esteemed panelists today, will be giving a very constructive webinar, and this webinar will be extended and will be a cornerstone to build on it for future activities related to issues of ethics in engineering and codes of practice. Maybe we can arrange with for future training programs and for future courses for young engineers. And I am really thankful for the esteemed panelists for their acceptance to participate today. And I would like to say that this is the sixth webinar organized by the Young Engineers Future Leaders Committees at the World Federation of Engineering Organizations under the title Engineering the Future. And this title, Engineering the Future, is also will be the basis of our preparations for the World Engineering Day, which happens every year on the 4th of March. And for the coming year, it will be under the theme of Engineering the Future in 2022. And I hope that all the young engineers who are following up today, our meetings, will follow the activities of the WFEO and the Young Engineers Future Leaders Committee activities in the near future. And I wish that we spend now some time listening to our fruitful presentations from our panelists, which will inspire and educate all the attendees on the issues which are related to the ethics in engineering. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Firas, for that good and brief introduction. Our first speaker, which is a lady from South Africa. I will just read a brief bio about herself and then she can start with the presentation. Ms. Priscilla Monye is currently a full-time lecturer at the Central University of Technology, Free State, and an experienced civil engineering practitioner. She has served on a variety of strategic, management, and technical roles in the consulting, government department, and construction fields for over 11 years with research and academia, just over 4 years of her 11 years experience. Research and academia were inspired by Ms. Monye's passion for solving social issues through engineering. Ms. Monye is currently part of the SAICE Young Members Panel Committee and Ethics Committee. Ms. Monye, can you please go ahead, and moderator and the organizers, can we please share the presentation?
Thank you so much, Mike. And I would like to thank the World Federation of Engineering Organizations and the organizations that are affiliated with. I will share my screen. I'm responsible to share my screen. So this ethic topic, it's one of the topics that for a long time in the industry, we've been sort of not wanting to face head on. And with this series, it helps with the engineering the future so that we, can you please allow me to switch off the video so that the presentation goes on smooth. So with the title, Engineering the Future, we just have to face the difficulties that the industry is experiencing, especially in South Africa. In 2018, the Young Members Panel of SAICE invited the Chief Justice of the country. He just vacated the office a month ago. So during the address, when he was addressing the young members, I remember one of the key things that he addressed the young members to is to say, never let a politician sort of tell you what to do based on your professional integrity. And one of the questions that came up from the young members is that what if they've graduated and stayed at home for a very long time, and then someone in the industry, maybe a contractor or government department, employ them, now they want them to do something. How will they look at what is ethics? How are they supposed to know what ethics are? And that was then these what the Chief Justice were then 2018, some of the 2018 Young Members Panel. And that's when we started strategizing around the awareness of ethics in engineering to the young members. So today I'm going to just go through a paper that was published by my mentor, Dr. Philip Stott. He's a structural engineer, honorary fellow member at SAICE. So he published, he's my mentor, also was my supervisor when I was doing my research, master's research, and I think he will also continue to mentor and be my supervisor as I go into this research and the industry. So he published a paper, The Need for Rethinking National Standards for Human Settlement. Now it was published in 2018 for the conference proceeding by the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research in South Africa. By the way, this paper that he published, it has an uncensored version that has not been published. So I'm taking out to the organizations that are affiliated with engineering to take a look at it, because it goes into details and call a spade a spade. Now, in his paper, he goes through Dr. Philip Stott, he has 56 years industrial experience and still keen to transfer the knowledge into the young ones. And he has 37 years as a professional engineer, because in South Africa, we are regulated by the Engineering Council of South Africa. So I thought it would be appropriate to share one of his studies and concern about what is happening in the industry. So in this paper, he is sharing 4 case studies that he was involved. Of course, he's been, 57 years old. It's a lot of projects to go by, but he chose this recent one, and he was talking about the SABS 1200 that was phased out, and then the SN the SANS 200 was introduced. So the concern around phasing out the SABS 1200 and introduced the SANS 2001. So the first project that he tells about this paper, and of course, participant can get hold of the paper. It's published by the CSIR in South Africa. So this project, it was a client and then regulatory body. We have various regulatory bodies in South Africa and the contractor. So the main contractor went through some financial difficulties and then looked for a second contractor to take over that project. So the second contractor wanted the engineer's opinion, and he was the engineer. So while going through this the site inspection, it shows that the area has expansive soil condition, and then the inspection of the drawings showed that the foundation are not sound for that particular site. The second contractor was willing to pay because he wanted to deliver good service. But then the regulatory body agents could not allow because now it was going to cost much, and then he ended up saying that the design was unsound, yes, and it will lead to cracking, but they claim that that is not the concern of the regulatory body. So his take from this project is that the administrators lacking in elementary engineering knowledge take engineering decision is most unfortunate. That is now when we are led by the SANS 2001. And then the second project was about, it was housing project 2. The engineer was involved, the client project manager, the client in this case was government department, and then the contractor. The engineer did all the design, the preliminary study designs that were supposed to be done. The contractor was experienced with the waffle raft because of the location. It was expensive clay. So while the contractor was ready to cast the foundation, the project manager from the client side came and then rearranged how the waterproofing arrangement was. But then the engineer came just in time before the concrete was cast, but the concrete was already on site. But now the project manager that was not registered as a professional engineer had already changed, and it was too late. So the engineer chose not to be accountable for that because it was too late, and the project manager had no professional qualification to allow him to certify the foundation. So if SABS 1200 was adopted for this kind of project, it would have been avoided. So now the SABS 1200, it specifies who is responsible for what. The engineer has to approve the works that are on site. The engineer has to decide on it. Now the SANS 2001 takes away that responsibility for each parties involved in the project. And then the other project, the fourth one, it was when 2 contractors were appointed for different phases of the project. Now the problem in this particular project, was that it was 2 contractors, and then the engineer was involved only after it was a mess on site because the surveyor did not label the points, and because the SANS 2001, no one has a responsibility. So a lot of the people lost in terms of the money that was invested in that project. So taking from these 4 projects, it does not only affect the quality of project, it affects also the engineering skills because now the SABC, the changes from SABS 1200 to the SANS 2001, no one is responsible for any work, and then also the lack transfer of knowledge to new engineering practice. In the country as it is now, we are losing engineers. Maybe they relocate. Some of them are left with no work. So this goes back to that imbizo that we had in 2018 by the Chief Justice to say engineers should be able to decide on engineering work. So the adoption of the SANS 2001 in case of the SABS 1200 was largely based on the philosophical grounds by one of the researchers that it applied the master servant, which now in this case the engineer is the master servant. So in South Africa, actually, we do have standards that can protect the integrity of the profession. However, with the phasing and not including the engineers to participate in the changes, that causes big problems. Now, to end this presentation, Dr. Philip Stott said, to solve this problem will not be easy. So a decision needs to be taken in a country that pursue engineering excellence rather than the false economy of demanding more available finances than can be provided by the sound engineering practice. So thank you so much for this webinar series, and I hope that the young engineer get involved in the policy making to protect the future so that they get placed in the industry. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Priscilla, for that presentation. I think it's very important that when we look into ethics, that standardization and best practices in the engineering space is adhered to. I think this was a classic example in the case study that the lecturer conducted, and I think it's good lessons going forward. Without taking much time, I would just like to remind the participants that you are free to join us in the panel discussions as well via the chat box. There's a Google link form that has been shared. Please add in your comments on the chat or on the Google link form. Indicate which country you're from and which region you are contributing from and which organization you're representing. Would really appreciate your participation as well. Our second speaker is a gentleman from Mexico that I recently started learning about his profile and I was quite amazed. So Mr. Rodrigo Juárez is a civil engineer from ITESM, Mexico. He holds a master's degree in construction management and engineering from the University of Leeds. In addition, he is pursuing a PhD in project management at the Faculty of Civil Engineering, also at the University of Leeds in the United Kingdom. In addition, he has completed FIDIC's Young Professionals Management Training Program, now FLMC. As for his professional experience, he has worked with the Texas Transportation Institute in Mexico City, the PMO for the Mexico City New International Airport, with Parsons Corporation, FOA Consulting, and currently works as a consultant for FOA Consulting, the first Mexican company certified in ISO 37001, 2006 in anti-bribery management systems, and first global consulting company certified in business integrity. In addition, he works as an external consultant for the Inter-American Development Bank, exploring best practices and lessons learned for rail transport and metro systems mega projects in Latin America. Rodrigo is also the current Vice Chair of FIDIC Future Leaders Council and Vice Chair of the Young Professionals Group of the Mexican Chamber of Consulting Companies, Mexico. Without further ado, Mr. Rodrigo Juárez, please, can you give us your presentation? Thank you.
Yes, sure, Michael. And thank you, Firas, for the invitation. I'm gonna share my screen. So can you see properly? Perfect.
Yes, we can see the screen properly. We continue.
Perfect. So, okay. So, basically, well, thanks to WFEO for the invitation. It's great to be here, and yeah, I'm gonna be talking to you about mainly three things. So, and Firas said this quite properly at the beginning. about my view on the ethical principles and codes of conduct that we have within the engineering profession. I'm gonna be talking about FIDIC a little bit, and also what FIDIC is doing about as a way to tackle corrupt practices and how to transition into a more into a better engineering world, to say it somehow, through the integrity management system. So I would like to start with this quote, which I really like, and I think it sets the stage for what we want to discuss and what we're trying to do with this series of webinars, especially for young people that are aiming to pursue their career in engineering. So it says, nothing is more important than the quality and integrity of an organization's people and its product. A company's success depends on the setting of high ethical standards for all things, big and small. The way you do anything is the way you do everything. And I really like this quote because it somehow allows everyone, or at least the company in which I am working for, and also for FIDIC, it's a matter of how we set high ethical standards for our companies and how we want to get recognized. So implementing good codes of conduct and maintaining high ethical principles are what defines us and the way we do things and the way we want to be recognized by our fellow colleagues in the industry. So with this, basically, when we are talking about the ethical principles and the codes of conduct, the way I see it is that basically we have the practitioners and the beneficiaries. So when we are talking about the practitioners, I refer to what we have the engineering professionals who have to abide by a code of conduct, and they act on behalf of the code of conduct established or which regulate the profession by itself. We have the government, which it's supposed to set the stage for practicing engineering in a, let's say, safe and regulated environment. We have multilateral development banks, which usually provide funds for the implementation of any particular project under certain characteristics with certain goals and aims and under certain criteria of transparency. We have the engineering institutions, which develop their codes of conduct, which regulate also the engineering professionals, particularly for these engineering institutions. For example, speaking particularly from Mexico, we have the College of Civil Engineers of Mexico, which regulates the action and how a professional civil engineering must work towards, let's say, a better construction industry. We have the National College of Consulting Engineers. For example, in the UK, there's the Royal Academy of Engineering. I mean, we can go on giving examples of these institutions in different countries. And also we have the engineering companies, which is a little bit more of what I'm gonna be talking about from the engineering companies point of view, and what companies such as FIDIC do in order to promote this. And when I talk about the practitioners and having said this, we have the beneficiaries. And I think that also taking some of the words that Firas said, basically we aim, or the engineering profession aims to set high standards for practicing the profession, because in the end, we are not just building an edifice, or we're not just building a bridge or a train as an engineering work. We're actually delivering a service for the society. And it's our responsibility as engineers to do it under the highest standards with the utmost ethical practices, because we've seen so many good examples of projects that have done what they're supposed to be doing, but also unfortunately due to unethical practices and lack of integrity in many companies, we've seen projects that have not worked the way they should have, and they've resulted in the fatality of many people. and we as engineers aim to reduce that. We aim to provide a good service for the society and be remembered as people that are doing the work they should be doing under the highest standards within our industry. So talking a little bit about FIDIC really quick, is the International Federation of Consulting Engineers, which was founded in 1913. And it acts as the global representative body for national associations of consulting engineers, representing over 1 million engineering professionals and over 40,000 firms in over 100 countries worldwide. And it's in charge of promoting and implementing consulting engineering industry strategic goals on behalf of its member associations. And it also disseminates information and resources of interest for its members. FIDIC has mainly 3 core values, which are sustainability, quality, and integrity, which is the one that I want to focus more for this particular presentation. And why do we think that the integrity is not that sustainability, which there is a big with COP26 happening just last week and big participation of different companies and countries worldwide. Of course, it's a very important topic. But integrity, particularly what I want to talk about is what its themes, and that's in further slides. But basically, FIDIC has been energetically promoting integrity within the industry for many years. And this is with the aim of saying that there's enough evidence to support the idea that if we have a formal and systematic approach towards the management of integrity, it works better than sporadic efforts developed by individual companies. So basically, FIDIC advocates for ethical integrity to fight corruption, and we believe that an integrated management system as an approach to control and verify its performance with this regard. So basically, it begins with the commitment of a firm to a specific code of conduct on behalf of all of its members and the leadership team, which also demonstrates that their commitment towards integrity is clear and visible for the company, the people working for the company, and the let's say the key stakeholders or interactions that company has within the market. So for some of you that might know what FIDIC is or who don't know, basically FIDIC is structured in the following way. It has the board, the secretariat, and the different councils. As Michael said before, I'm representing the Future Leaders Council. And it has 10 working committees, which all produce interesting documents for different areas within the engineering industry. I've highlighted the Integrity Management Committee, Quality Committee, and Sustainable Development Committee as the ones that are the main representatives of FIDIC goals, core values. But what I want to talk about a little bit more is about the publications that FIDIC does. So many of you might know and have worked probably with the standard forms of contract, which is probably FIDIC's most relevant and most important documents. But it's not the only things that FIDIC does. So it publishes of different types of practice documents of resources in quality management, quality-based selection, sustainability management policies, and more importantly, I would say, and which is what I want to be talking to you about, is the integrity management system. So basically, the integrity management system was born back in 2001, which was formerly known as BIMS, as the Business Integrity Management Training Manual, and it evolved to what it's called FIMS in 2011, which when FIMS 1 was created. In 2015, FIMS 2 was developed, and in 2019, FIMS 3 was developed. So what's FIMS? So basically, FIMS 1 refers to the set of integrity management policies and principles that must be adopted by all firms. FIMS 2 explores the different procedures that companies can use to develop their integrity management systems. The idea is that these two documents, FIMS 1 and FIMS 2, should be used together as they are complementary parts on how to develop, implement, and operate a FIDIC integrity management system. Additionally, and based on the ISO 37001 anti-bribery management systems, FIMS 3 standards describes how a firm can grow towards the concept of compliance and eventually certify its integrity management system. So in the brief introduction that Michael gave, our company, FA Consulting in Mexico, is certified on this. We've actually helped develop this. And it's a way that basically defines the manner on how you do your business, how you conduct business, how you register any illegal activities if it happens, and how you deal with them. And it's a very important topic because not many companies have this, and basically it has become like our formal presentation when we are making business in not only in our country but internationally. And it's a way which other companies recognize us and how we also sell our services. It's a matter of how we want to get recognized by everyone within our industry. And basically, FIDIC FIMS has three main goals. Basically, it establishes that there must be zero tolerance for corruption, bribery, collusion, extortion, fraud, and conflict of interest, and any other form of illegal or illicit activities in any of its forms. Companies must develop and comply with their own code of conduct. Of course, as we were mentioning before, these codes of conduct are regulated by the profession, by the professional bodies, and how they come together, and also what we as a company want to show to the companies that we are working for, or together, let's say. And finally, companies must formulate and operate their FIMS based on the characteristics of their businesses and the possible risks of corruption in their markets. So this is important to mention because similarly to many of you that have used standard forms of contracts, which are applicable to any jurisdiction or to any legislation in different countries, and they are adaptable, so as FIMS. It's a system, of course, that the aim is to be implemented in any company, but it's flexible and adaptable to the needs of every company and the way they want to implement it. Of course, it has certain principles that must not be manipulated or eliminated, to say somehow, but it's a matter on how we want to conduct our business with the highest ethical standards of the industry. And just to finalize, for anyone that is interested in engaging with FIDIC, with the Future Leaders Council, I am putting here some webinars, emails, web pages, and yeah, just feel free to get in touch. And again, thanks to WFEO for the invitation. And I'm done with my presentation.
Thank you so much, Rodrigo, for that insightful presentation and the works that FIDIC is doing in terms of policy standardization with companies and consulting companies especially. I hope that entrepreneurs and future leaders that aspire to be in business, they register their companies with FIDIC and also go through those publications that are quite interesting. We still want to remind the participants that you are welcome to submit your questions via the Google Forms or Google Sheets link that has been provided. So far, we have received some questions. Keep them coming in for the speakers. And then without any further ado, I would like to introduce our final speaker, which is our main speaker for today. I have had interesting engagements with the speaker prior to this event, and the works that he has done. We applaud definitely your work, and I would just like to quickly read his bio and then we get into it. So our main speaker is Mr. Neill Stansbury. He's a co-founder and director of GIACC. He's a construction lawyer who has worked for over 35 years in the international infrastructure space. He was chairman of the International Organization of Standardization Anti-Bribery Project Committee, which published ISO 37001, chairman of British Standards Institution Anti-Bribery Working Group, which published BS 10,500, and vice chairman of the World Federation of Engineering Organizations Anti-Corruption Standing Committee. He has given anti-corruption presentations and workshops in over 40 countries. Neill, over to you. Neill, can you please unmute your mic?
Sorry, yes, thank you very much, Michael. Thank you very much, Firas. A great pleasure to be here today at this very important webinar. I'll just share my screen. Can you see clearly my screen there, Michael?
Very clear. Go ahead.
Thank you very much then. So basically, I'm going to give a brief overview today of corruption on infrastructure projects. And what I'm going to cover are 4 topics. What is corruption? When does corruption occur? The cost of corruption and preventing it. What do you do to stop it? It's going to be a flying overview in just over 30 minutes. So obviously it will be very condensed, but you can find out a lot more information on these topics from our website, which is on the bottom of the first slide there, www.giacccentre.org, where we have a wealth of free of charge downloadable information on identifying corruption on construction projects and how to prevent it. So first of all, what is corruption? There is no fixed definition of corruption. Some people talk of corruption really in the form of bribery, but we believe this is a mistake. We think that really when you talk of corruption, you should talk about any activity which involves any type of bribery or deception or dishonesty in order to gain any personal or corporate advantage. And therefore our definition of corruption includes all of bribery, extortion, fraud, cartels, and abuse of power, and all related criminal offences. You must use the wide definition in our view, as all of these activities are criminal actions. They're all damaging, and they must all be prevented. And in particular, prevention of all these activities, the measures you must adopt are very similar in their approach and outcome. So therefore, we think when you talk of corruption, talk about it in the widest possible sense. Let's look at those categories which I've listed there: bribery, extortion, fraud, cartels, and abuse of power. Those, I believe, are the main corrupt activities which take place in relation to infrastructure projects. Let's look at each of those briefly in turn. So bribery, I think every country has different laws and different definitions of these types of offences, but they tend all to end up in the same place, which is that bribery is normally defined as someone offering or giving, or someone requesting or receiving an advantage as an incentive to act improperly. Therefore, you can receive money, you can give money with no problem at all, but you must never do so if you're giving it or receiving it as an incentive to act improperly. That is at the heart of bribery. And of course, the bribe can be anything. It can be money, property, assets, gifts, entertainment, paying for a holiday, a promise of future work. Anything of value to the recipient can constitute a bribe. And of course, bribes are frequently not given directly. They're concealed, and therefore they may be given through intermediaries. For example, through an agent, a joint venture partner, a subsidiary, another group company, or a subcontractor. Because often you never want to give a bribe direct. It's too obvious. So you will hide it, conceal it in the subcontract chain. Very brief examples. I'm sure everyone is very familiar with these types of examples. The project owner developing a project may bribe a government official to obtain planning permission. They may want to get land rezoned from residential to commercial because they can make a bigger profit on the development if that is the case. And obviously the planning officials are very exposed to bribery in this event. Or during the tender for a construction project, the tenderer may bribe the project engineer who is designing the project to provide a design with which only that tenderer can fully comply, so enabling the tender to win with an inflated bid price. Many other competitors may tender, but they will not be compliant because only one will be compliant with a corruptly provided design. Or, at its simplest form, a tenderer pays a bribe to a procurement manager to ensure that the tenderer wins the contract. And once the construction process takes place, there are frequent opportunities for bribery during the construction process. For example, a supplier may bribe a supervisor on the project to ignore short delivery of products or defective construction works. There are numerous examples of bribery which can take place at any time in the construction process. Extortion is a sort of a partner to some degree of bribery. It's the other ends of the bribery equation. It's where someone demands money or another benefit in return for not inflicting personal harm or damage, or in return for performing a service that is properly due. And sometimes this form of extortion is called a facilitation payment. Now, the distinction between a bribe and extortion is quite simple. A bribe is a payment which you make to make someone act improperly, to do something which they should not be doing. Extortion is where someone is taking money off you in return for them acting properly. So they should be giving you a certificate, they should be giving you a permit, but they don't do it unless you pay them money, and that's extortion. So examples of extortion, one category is in return for not inflicting personal harm or damage. They say, give us money or we will harm you. For example, a policeman may demand payment from a supplier's driver in order to allow equipment through a roadblock. And there may be fear on the driver that if he does not pay the policeman may arrest him or in some way harm him. So he pays the policeman through fear. Or a gang may come to a construction site and demand money from the contractor in order not to damage their premises or equipment. So again, you have to pay them money to avoid them damaging your premises. The second category of extortion doesn't involve harm in a personal basis, but it involves harm on a commercial basis because they demand a payment from you in return for performing a service that is properly due. So a government official demands payment from a supplier in order to issue a customs clearance, which is properly due. You, the supplier, should get your customs clearance. You filled in the correct forms, you've done everything properly. But the government official says, I will not give you the clearance unless you pay me. That is extortion. Or the manager of the project owner demands payment from a contractor in order to approve an invoice. The invoice has been properly submitted, the work has been properly done, but the project owner manager says, I'm not paying you unless you pay me money. The difference there between bribery, of course, is if the contractor does work which is not due, they pay a bribe to the project owner manager to give them the payment, which is not due. Extortion is when the project owner says, I know you're due the payment, you've done the work, I'm not going to give you the money unless you pay me. Fraud, using deception to gain some financial or other advantage. In infrastructure projects, fraud is much more common in my view, than bribery. Fraud requires some deliberate or reckless act by the person committing the fraud. So if you make a statement orally or in a document, which you know is not true, or you suspect may not be true, that is fraud. If you make a genuine mistake in the document or your statement, that's not fraud, as long as the person making the mistake corrects it as soon as they become aware of it. So an example of this is if you're a supplier and you supply 5 items of equipment to site, but you demand payment for 10 items of equipment from the project owner. If you know you only supplied 5, but you're demanding 10, that's a deliberate act, which is fraud. If you can't be bothered to check, you don't know how many items of equipment are on site, and you just say, I'll charge for 10, but I'm not sure. That is reckless. You have not checked. That is fraud. But if you honestly think they're 10, and you claim for 10, and the next day you discover there are only 5, you've made a mistake. It's an honest mistake, but you must correct it immediately. If you allow the mistake to be uncorrected, you are approving your mistake with knowledge, and that becomes fraud. So for example, of fraud, if you're a tenderer and you submit false information in your tender about your experience and resources, you claim you've been working on these projects for 10 years, you've only got 5 years experience. You claim your project manager is an experienced project manager, but he is not. That is fraud if you know or are reckless that the information in the tender is false. If you're a contractor and you submit a claim to the project owner for payment for work which you know you didn't do, or not sure whether or not you did, that is fraud. On the other side of the equation, if a project owner charges liquidated damages to the contractor when the project owner knows or is reckless as to whether or not the contractor was at fault, that is fraud. If a project engineer certifies work as being satisfactory when the engineer knows that the work's effective or couldn't be bothered to check, that is fraud. So any action in a statement, a document, orally or in writing, which is not true, and where you know it's not true, or you're reckless as to whether or not it's true, is fraud. If you make an honest mistake, it's not fraud as long as you correct it as soon as you discover the mistake. Cartels are where 2 or more organizations agree secretly to the prices at which they'll sell their products, or as to which of them will win a tender. They are secretly agreeing with competitors to fix their prices or to fix the outcome of a tender. That, in most jurisdictions, is a criminal offense. Many countries have a separate criminal offense of cartel, but others do not have a separate offense of cartel, but it will normally be fraud, because you're representing to the project owner that you're competing genuinely with your competitors to win the project or supply products, but you're not. You're secretly stitching up the market, and therefore you're deceiving the project owner, and therefore it's fraud. For example, if bidders for a tender secretly agree in advance as to which of them will win the tender, and then the winner, as a result, being pre-selected, can submit a higher price than market price, and all the other competitors submit an even higher price because they've been told in advance what the winner's price is going to be. That is a cartel, which is a criminal offense. A losers fee agreement, which happens in some projects, all the bidders agree to compete genuinely in open competition, but they each put an additional sum of money, say $1 million, onto their tender price. Whoever wins the project shares that $1 million between all the losers equally to compensate them for their lost bid costs. It's a secret arrangement. The project owner is therefore unknowingly paying the bid cost of the losing competitors. That is fraud. It would not be fraud if you tell the project owner in advance, but normally you don't. It's kept secret, in which case it is fraud. Or price fixing, when the suppliers, for example, of concrete, agree that they will not compete against each other, or they'll compete, but never drop below an agreed price floor per unit. They're fixing the price. Therefore, that is fraud. That is a cartel. And finally, abuse of power. Anyone in a position of trust who abuses that power for illegal purposes is committing an offence of abuse of power. For example, a government official who's meant to act impartially in the best interest of the public puts pressure on the manager of a state-owned enterprise to specify a named supplier in the bid documents, which bidding contractors must use. For example, you must use this type of air conditioning. The supplier of the air conditioning is secretly owned by the government official's family member. That's an abuse of power by the government official, which is a criminal offence. Or a member of a tender evaluation panel has a personal interest in a bidding contractor, which he is evaluating. He does not declare the interest and votes in favour of that contractor winning the contract. He's meant to be acting impartially and should not have acted in conflict of interest, should have withdrawn from the tender panel because of the conflict of interest. By not withdrawing and by supporting the contractor in which he has an interest, that is an abuse of power. Now, all those categories I've mentioned, bribery, fraud, cartels, and abuse of power, are in almost all countries criminal offences and can result in the people committing the offences, if they're individuals, being prosecuted, being fined, losing their jobs, losing their professional status, and going to jail. The organisations involved, the employers of the individuals, in many countries can also be criminally liable for the acts of the individual managers. So all of these are criminal offences and can carry severe penalties. That's going through the main types of corruption offences in the construction sector. When do these offences occur? It's a common assumption which we hear again and again, including from many leading international development agencies, etc., that the most corruption takes place in the tendering phase. And they put all their controls into the tendering phase to ensure proper, impartial, competitive tenders. But they do not pay any attention whatsoever to the design phase, the project selection, or the construction phase, because they believe that corruption takes place in the tendering phase. In our view, that is materially incorrect and very dangerous view to take. It should be assumed that significant corruption can occur in any phase of a project. Now, for example, if you take a graph example of the first view, people say, yes, some corruption takes place in the project selection, the funding, the planning, the design, the execution, operation, dispute resolution, but the tendering is where we're worried about. In our view, no. You should treat all phases as being equally at risk. We see corruption as being like water going down a pipe at high pressure. If the pipe is leaking at the project selection, funding, planning, etc., phases, water will come out at that point, the water being the corruption leakage, the cash leakage. So if you plug just the tendering phase with a plumber's bandage to stop water leaking out at tendering phase, the water will leak out at higher pressure as a result in all the other phases. You have to bandage all the holes in the pipe so the water you put in at one end comes out at the other end. So when you are working on an infrastructure project, be aware that all the types of corruption I mentioned, bribery, fraud, cartels, abuse of power, can take place at any stage through the project, beginning to end. And also it can involve anyone at any level in the construction project, from the government officials and project owner at the top of the chain, and the funders funding the project, right the way through the contractors, the consultants, the subcontractors and suppliers, and all the individuals involved in the project. Every certificate signed, every cubic meter of concrete delivered, every cubic meter of earthworks excavated, every action in a construction project, every application for payment, every approval is a corruption interface. Any interaction between two people where money or certificates or approvals change hands is a corruption interface. From the very smallest bribe at the bottom of the project to approve 5 cubic meters when only 4 took place, right the way to the top, where huge corruption takes place in return for contracts and payment. So your risk is all those types of corruption all the way through the project and involving all of your project participants. And assuming this corruption takes place, what are the costs? It's certainly one of the greatest obstacles to development of safe and adequate infrastructure. Project funds are diverted to corrupt officials, funders, contractors, consultants, suppliers, and agents. The diversion of this fund and the corrupt actions in relation to this diversion has a human cost and an economic cost. And the economic cost can be global, national, or at project level. So looking very briefly at the different costs. The human costs are obvious. Public money is being stolen. If public money is stolen, inevitably you have fewer good roads, fewer schools, fewer hospitals. Inevitably, you have poor safety and environmental procedures. The consequence of that is also inevitable. People will die due to lack of food and healthcare and dangerous infrastructure. Therefore, quite simply, corruption kills. What about the economic cost? People spend a lot of time and effort trying to calculate the cost of corruption. In our view, it's a waste of time. It's impossible because you will never know the exact cost of corruption. The whole point about corruption, it is concealed. Most corruption is never discovered. If it is discovered, it's often not prosecuted. So you cannot possibly quantify accurately the cost of corruption. How do you know how much corruption is taking place unless you've discovered every corrupt action at every point in every project in the world? You cannot do that. So it's all just total guesswork. But when we look at the guesswork, you can guess quite frightening figures because the World Bank, the EU Commission, the World Economic Forum, they all, I use the word estimate, but the word guess would be better, the cost of corruption at 5% of the world's gross product. If you take the GDP figures for 2019 for the world of 142 trillion US dollars, this would equate to $7 trillion per annum of stolen funds. But as I said, we don't know that. But what we do know from first-hand evidence worldwide is that there is a huge amount of corruption in infrastructure, and it's hugely damaging. And therefore, we don't need to know the actual cost. We know we have to stop it. On a national level, the costs are obvious because if you have a high level of corruption in a country, that inevitably will result in reduced investment in the country. Investors do not want to invest if they believe the money will be stolen. There'll also be distortion of public expenditure because corrupt decisions point public money into corrupt projects rather than into projects which are needed. Bribes will result in safety and environmental safeguards being avoided, resulting in pollution and early deaths. The stolen money means there's less infrastructure, which means that the outcome is inadequate. It also leads to slower economic growth generally in the country, and therefore inevitably to greater poverty. At a project level, on an infrastructure project, again, it's obvious. If you have a high level of corruption, your financing, capital, operating, and maintenance costs will go up. Your finance costs go up because there's a bribe in the contract cost, which has to be financed. The capital cost goes up because the project costs more with the bribery, as with the operating cost and maintenance cost. If there's bribery in the quality of the work, you'll have higher maintenance. It can result in defective projects because supervisors are bribed to turn a blind eye to quality. But it also damages companies which may be involved in the sector. If you're an honest company and you do not want to engage in any corruption, you will lose work because in many places you cannot win a contract unless you are willing to pay the bribe. So therefore the ethical companies are being penalized. But people who do take part in corruption, maybe because they think there's no alternative, then risk being prosecuted and being jailed and being fined. And for the individuals, sorry, not the companies cannot be jailed, they risk debarment, prosecution, and fines. For the individuals, if you're not corrupt, You face extortion, having money demands made of you, and threats, which could cause personal danger. But if you are corrupt, if you do pay the bribes, you risk imprisonment, fines, and loss of employment. So it causes tremendous damage, not just nationally and to the project costs, but also to the project companies and to the individuals involved. And the result is it can deter ethical people and ethical companies from working on projects, resulting in a diminution in quality. If I just very briefly take an example of very simplistic of corruption in a project, people often talk about bribes being 5% of a project cost. And therefore, if a project costs 100 million, you're losing 5 million through bribery. That's oversimplistic in our view, because corruption takes place throughout the project cycle. So just by one way of example here, if you take a power plant and just say the non-corrupt plant cost of the power plant, properly designed, properly tendered competitively, ethically managed, properly built, would be $100 million US. But say there's a corrupt overdesign because the public servants involved and the contractors who want to win the work want the cost to go up, because the higher the cost, the more profits can be made. They corruptly overdesign the project by 10% by specifying materials and equipment which are unnecessary or overdesigned. That may add $10 million to the cost of the project unnecessarily, corruptly. But then the contractors who are bidding, they're bidding to an estimated price of 110 million now, not 100 because of the increase in design. But they're told they have to pay a 10% bribe if they're going to win it. So they have to add 11 million to their contract price. So it now becomes 121 million. But that 121 million has to be financed because there's now 21 million extra cost in the project over and above the 100 million, which has to be financed. The financing costs over, say, 25 years would then add another 10 million to the project. Not the financing of the 100 million, the financing of the 21 million corrupt payment adds another 10 million, which means it's now 131 million. But if it's a corrupt project and you have corrupt project officials and corrupt contractors who are willing to pay and receive bribes, the chances are high that there'll be corruption also in the works. The contractor may demand payment for work it didn't do. There may be corrupt variations which increase the scope of work unnecessarily. The corrupt project officials may demand more money from the contractor, so the contractor has to over-invoice to pay these bribes. Just say that adds another 9 million to the project. That becomes 140 million now. And let's just say also the contract is run defectively because the contractor is corrupt, takes shortcuts on the work, bribes the supervisors to turn a blind eye to the defective work. That has to be repaired before the project can actually be operating properly. Say that adds another 10 million. So you've ended up here with a project costing 150 million, not 100 million. So my point here, these figures, of course, are all hypothetical. My point is you can't just calculate the estimated cost of bribery in a country. You have to factor in all the consequent costs resultant on the bribery, the fraud, the overdesign, the defective works, etc., and the extra financing costs. So you're quite easily paying 50% more for your projects rather than 5% more. So finally, preventing corruption. Can we stop it? Yes, we can stop it, definitely. But the problem we face hugely is that the people who can stop it most easily, who are normally the politicians, the public officials in charge of the public sector, sadly, often they're the ones who are leading the corruption. So we in the industry have to make a stand to prevent it from the supply side. We have to try and close off the opportunities for corruption as professionals. How can we do this? The actions we can take ourselves and the actions we in the industry can demand are taken by the public sector. So I've divided these into three categories. Our actions as engineers, our actions as organizations working in the sector, and project actions on major projects. So engineers, what can each of us do as an engineer or another professional architects, lawyers, QSs working in the sector. What can we do to stop corruption? There's no point saying there's nothing we can do. It's impossible. It's too late. That's rubbish. That's defeatist talk. We're dooming our children if we take that defeatist approach. Each one of us has to take a proactive approach personally. And if each one of us together makes an individual stand, together that will make a cumulative stand. So what we must do is adopt a zero tolerance policy to bribery in our professional life. So in our activities and as an engineer, we must have a series of rules. We must never defraud or deceive anyone at all. We must always speak and act honestly with integrity. We must never offer, give, or request or accept a bribe. We must never participate in any cartel or price-fixing arrangement. We must never abuse the powers with which we have been entrusted. These are our personal rules which we must live by. But also we may have a role as a manager, managing other people, which gives us additional duties. As a manager, we must not authorize or condone any corrupt activity in the function we're managing. We must take reasonable steps to prevent any corrupt activity taking place in the function we're managing. And if some corrupt activity is suspected or identified, we must take reasonable steps to investigate it and deal with it. We cannot turn a blind eye to it or sweep it under the carpet. And also as a professional, we may be acting in an impartial capacity as an evaluator of tenders or a certifier of project value or payment. In that capacity, we must act fairly and impartially. We must not be influenced by other people in acting in this manner. We must never certify a payment unless we honestly believe that the certificate is due. We must act impartially, honestly. For the organizations we're involved in, which could be any organization, could be the project owner, a public sector owner like the Road Development Agency, or a private sector project owner developing a building, or the funders lending the money, contractors, suppliers, consultants. Anyone working as an organization in the infrastructure sector has its own duties. They must all adopt a zero tolerance policy to corruption in the organization. And the zero tolerance policy must be led from the top, absolute commitment from the leaders of the organization. But importantly, and touching on some previous presentations, all the organizations involved in the sector above a reasonable size must implement anti-corruption management systems in their organization designed to prevent corruption and deal with any corruption which occurs. These controls include risk assessment, due diligence, training, financial controls, commercial controls, reporting and auditing, and other similar controls. And an excellent example of such a system is ISO 37001, which is a sister standard to 9001 quality, 45001 safety, etc., and which can be independently certified that you are compliant with it. So organizations must have a zero tolerance policy, have that policy led from the top, and must implement a proper anti-corruption management system. Finally, projects. Projects themselves need to have anti-corruption controls put in place, which touches upon all the organizations and individuals involved in that project. So in respect of any project, particularly the public sector projects, there must be a zero tolerance policy to corruption in relation to that project. And that zero tolerance policy must be led from the top by all organizations and participants involved in that project. And critically also, there should be a project anti-corruption management system put in place for all major public sector projects designed to prevent corruption and deal with any corruption which takes place. And these project controls are controls over project selection, project design, procurement, contract management, and financial management. These controls would require major contractors and major suppliers to be certified to ISO 37001 as a pre-qualification condition for participating in the project. All project personnel should be trained in anti-corruption. There should be independent monitoring and auditing of the public sector project. There should be reporting mechanisms in place, and all critical items in relation to the project, the tenders, valuations, payments, certifications, etc., audit reports must be published in full on a public website to give total transparency to the project. Now, an example of such a project anti-corruption management system is GIACC's project anti-corruption system, PACS, which is available online and can be used by anyone free of charge. So thank you very much. That's a brief overview on corruption in the infrastructure sector and how it takes place and how to prevent it. If you want further information on these matters, you can, as I say, visit our website below. Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you, Firas. Thank you all for listening.
Wow. Thank you so much, Neill, for that insightful presentation. I was taking down my notes. I'm even filling up the book now. You know, just to summarize, perhaps the take that I took from your presentation, it reminds me of when I was preparing for the moderation for this webinar. I bumped into an article that says, you know, when you're talking issues of ethics and anti-corruption and anti-bribery, normally it doesn't catch people's eye when you say ethics in engineering. But if you say how to avoid going to jail, then you get people's attention. So I think your presentation kind of fits in that description. And thank you so much. I would like to dive into the Q&A session for the interest of time. I've prepared my own questions. Perhaps maybe I must just start with you, Neill. In terms of training, do you offer any training courses on anti-corruption, anti-bribery? Because as young engineers, we are getting into the space where we want to get the education of it.
Yeah, it's a very important question, Michael, and thank you for your words there. We do online, we have a free of charge online module, which is available in 7 languages. And if you go to our website and go to the training in the index, it'll take you to that page. It's a module designed for professionals in the infrastructure sector with a management responsibility. It takes about 1.5 hours to do the module, and it takes you very clearly through the corruption risks on infrastructure projects, and has a series also of ethical dilemmas, which you have to think about and then look at the answer. Once you've completed this module, you type your name into the final page and you can print a certificate of completion, which is a dated named certificate of completion. It takes about 1.5 hours. It's entirely free of charge. It's quite a high level, detailed module. It's available in 7 languages on our website, free of charge, as I say. That's a more complicated program for more senior professionals with a management responsibility. We are in the process of planning a more simple module for junior staff, which will probably only take about 15 minutes to complete. Again, it will be available free of charge online, and as soon as we publish that, we will let you know so you can have a link to that. But thirdly and importantly, we're working on a university training module, which we hope to publish next year, which we've made available to all universities worldwide, again at no cost, which is designed to be a module taken during 1 semester at university or engineering school to train young engineers on ethics and how to identify corrupt situations. So when they leave university and enter the profession, they come in with a level of knowledge which they currently have not got, but also with a belief and a commitment that ethics is vital. So we have these 3 modules, one of which is available now and 2 of which will be available within the next 12 months.
Thank you so much, Neill. I like that, you know, the modules, some of them are free to download from the internet. I think we commend you obviously for your hard work and also making it accessible. I would also want to read some of the comments that are on the chat. One comment from Leon. He says, a great overview of preventing corruption on infrastructure projects. So thank you, Leon, on that comment. And I see that we have a question on the Google Forms. This question is coming from Engineer Lutherod George from Ghana, under the organization Ministry of Roads and Highways. If I can just read the question. What happens in the case of powerful government official insisting of you doing what the ethics does not support, but yet in line of your duty, you realize your position, family, and life is under threat, right? Let me just see if I can explore. Your position in life is under threat. What should the engineer do, and in what actions can the professional body do in the regard, knowing also that the professional body is under the wings of the government? So that's the question from Engineer George. Neill, I want to give you an opportunity to answer this first, and perhaps I also want Rodrigo's input on it. Did you catch the question, or should I repeat?
I did, yeah. It's a very good question, and it's a very sad situation, but which we all fully understand. If you're in personal danger or your family is threatened, it's a terrible, terrible position to be in. And we always say to people, if your family is threatened or you're threatened, then you mustn't put yourself in a position of danger. And therefore, if you're demanded money or demanded to take an action with fear of your life, the safest thing is to do it, because it's not right to put you or your family in danger. But then hopefully you can go to your professional institution confidentially, and you can explain the situation to the professional institution. And hopefully the professional institution will gather together enough people and enough power and a big enough alliance to be able to do something about the underlying problem, which allows us to take place in the government, to put pressure on the government to deal with these people who are doing these evil things. But it's so difficult when you have that situation. There's no easy answer. But I'd say one thing: never put yourself in personal danger. Your life and your family is the most important thing. But secondly, you can't deal with this by yourself. You have to turn to the professional institution, I think, to help you and guide you through this.
No, I agree. It's unfortunate that these cases, they come up, and especially for younger engineers entering into the profession, they are now caught between a rock and a hard place, and they have to make a decision. So Rodrigo, I don't know, on a company's point of view, representing FIDIC and consulting engineers, what happens in this instance? Because many of us as young engineers, we are employed in the consulting space. And if a situation like this is happening, what's your take on it? You can unmute.
Yeah, sure. So I would agree with Neill. I think it's a very complex situation, but it's important to differentiate when basically you're doing it for just getting money or getting a project than when you're facing a life-threatening situation, as in this case. So if basically your life or your family's life is in threat, I mean, of course, their safety, I would say it's the most important thing, but I would agree that it should not stay there. You have to go and speak to someone, register it somehow, because in the end, not because you do it, that means that if you're already facing that circumstance of danger, that it will stop there, because it's something that could be escalating on a way that you don't know when that's gonna stop. So it's a matter for me also of saying where you want to stop it. Fair enough, you do it that first time, not because you want to, but because you're being forced to. But you have to go and talk to someone, to a professional body or someone in your company, depending on your position, and say, this is happening. I'm registering it just in case, to say it somehow, just in case something actually does happen, that there is a registry that you flag that issue and say, if something happens to me, this person, this body, or whatever is accountable or responsible for any circumstance that is happening to me or my family. Because if you just keep it to yourself to go out of this issue, there's nothing that guarantees you that tomorrow morning in the same project, they will ask you, okay, yesterday you did that, today we want you to do this. And it's a never-ending loop. And as Neill was saying, there needs to be a point and a person and someone who says it stops here, not at your own risk or your family's risk, but it's a collective action that you could be working on together to prevent this from happening further in the future. We're young engineers working in a big company. I mean, you can always go and speak to your manager, to any superior figure, probably in, like, if it's a company certified in let's say ISO 37001, there is formal procedures and committees established for internally, how do you say, to say or describe what situation is happening in a confidential way, in which you must communicate to your own office and say, hey, this is happening, how can we resolve it, and escalate the situation to an upper management level and see how they can also help you. That would be my response.
Oh, thank you so much. Because I had a follow-up question to that, Rodrigo, just before you mute. The company's code of conduct. Companies obliged to have their own, the companies that are registered under FIDIC.
Well, yeah, I mean, every company, in my opinion, should have their own code of conduct, but also they must abide by the codes of conduct of the professional institutions that they are working on or their professional organizations. So, I mean, if you're a company affiliated to FIDIC, you don't necessarily have to have one, but it's important to have one as a way of operating the way you do your own business and how you conduct your business, because having your own code of conduct actually can create a culture on how you want to operate within your own company and the culture you want to establish within your company, and as a way of how you're going to be working with external parties.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Rodrigo. And then Priscilla, just to rope you into the conversation as well. Looking at standardization, especially with the case study that you mentioned, I was particularly interested in obviously the roles and responsibilities that some of the young engineers are put into on a project. So in your opinion, what is the role really of the engineer in the project?
Thank you, Mike, for that question. And I think just to add to that in your question, in South Africa, we do have a code of practice for each and every field in the civil engineering. I'll speak about the civil engineering because that's the field I'm at. For an example, we do have the code of practice by the South African Institution of Civil Engineering, and we have code of ethics for both SAICE and ASCE, of which, according to the legislation, we have to register as a professional engineer to sign off any other designs. So in this, if you remember, I mentioned that moving from the SABS 1200 to the SANS 2001, it has now created that vacuum that the young engineers don't get that quality experience led by the competent engineer. So there is a problem that we're facing, and SAICE is aware of it, and there are works around working on at least those code of practice should be followed. I'm not really sure about going back to the SABS 1200, but the SABS 1200 had the engineers responsible for that, the quantity surveyors responsible for this, the owner, the contractor. So it had every responsible for each person. Now with the standards that are introduced, it's a bit of a problem because no one is responsible should anything go wrong on site. So for now, what we can do as the young engineers, follow the code of practice because they're there and you're able to excuse or recuse yourself to say, according to this code of practice, I cannot fall in this. That's why at the university now, when I advise the lecturers to say, we need to make the students aware of the standards. Each and everything that you do, you have to follow the standard. If it's not in the standards, you're putting yourself in a position that you can even be fined for that and then be removed from ASCE. So the most important thing is to just follow what you know, and then we'll take it from there.
No, 100%. No, thanks so much, Priscilla, because the challenge that I've also noticed in the industry is you are made to perform duties because of maybe your line manager says you must do it. And then you are now faced with the decision, if I don't listen to this instruction, maybe you have assessed it to be maybe an unlawful instruction, then you might lose your job. In that instance, these are cases that we normally hear of from our young engineers in the South African context. What would you advise a young engineer getting into the space where the line manager is instructing them to perhaps act unlawfully, and then they have assessed it, and some of it is blurred lines because of inexperience? The younger engineer might not know that this action is unlawful. Yes, Priscilla?
Yes, Mike, that's the very same thing as the engineer that is facing whereby the family is threatened and are threatened. The young engineers end up doing it because they want to support the family. So that is why when we looked at to come up with a rally to say, this is what is happening, we need to come up with solutions. It has been happening in the industry. Nowadays, it's common. And even before this, this webinar, there was a young engineer that says, I was told that I was hired for my signature. So those are the problems that the young engineers face in the industry. And unfortunately now the solution is not as straight. It's so difficult that the young engineer end up doing it. So that's where now the young engineers should put the organizations that regulate, because in South Africa we regulate the contractors, regulate the engineers. So there has to be a starting point. Unfortunately now there's no straight answer onto don't do it because you risk that you lose your job. And there are a lot of graduates, there are a lot of even experienced in civil engineering practitioners that are at home not working, or even working probably as a cashier or in the banks just to put food on the plate. So that is why we're having webinars like this, that we get solutions to that type of problems.
Thank you so much for your response, Priscilla. I think it was spot on. Just to go back to the chat a little bit, I think there's a question for Neill here. So it's from Engineer George again, saying, Neill, how do I become a member of GIACC?
I think it's a very nice question. Thank you for your interest. We actually don't have members, unfortunately. We're a not-for-profit organization which publishes best practice. So we don't actually have any membership. But if he was interested in seeing, what alliances we have in his country, he can certainly send me a message on our website chat box, a contact box, and I can certainly give him information, because we're always looking to sign alliances with professional institutions nationally. And so we can certainly work with people to encourage their professional institution to sign an alliance with us, where we have a training alliance or something like that, where we can support the professional institution. But we don't have members in itself. But anyone from this webinar is very welcome to get in touch with me through our contact box on our website, and happily enter into a dialogue with them.
Thank you so much, Neill. Just looking at the Google Sheets form, I'm seeing there's people that are still typing. So we might need to take the questions offline for the interest of time as well. For now, I think on the chat, I can see that there's there's no further questions that are coming in. Yes, I think I'll just maybe introduce our ethics committee chair before we wrap up, and then he can give us a brief closing remarks with regards to this webinar. Just give me a second. Right. So I just personally want to thank, obviously, everyone that participated in this webinar, including the participants and the engaging questions as well. And to all the speakers, Priscilla, Rodrigo, and Neill, thank you so much for this insightful webinar. I think for me, I'll take these lessons going forward, and I'll definitely check out the website. And so that I'm also empowered and in my own local communities, try and implement some of the lessons and the trainings. Just in closing, a professional engineer project manager and an entrepreneur for over 25 years. Sorry. Our closing remarks will come from Papias, who is a professional engineer, project manager, entrepreneur for over 25 years, founder and CEO of Star Learning Solutions, Ltd, President-elect of Federation of Africa Engineering Organizations, short form FEO, and Chairman of the World Federation of Engineering Organization WFEO Committee on Anti-Corruption, immediate past President of Institution of Engineers Rwanda, with practical experiences in leadership, advocacy, mediation, and arbitration. Passionately, he stands to inspire and transform the new generation into market leaders and entrepreneurs full of integrity and best practices. He is also an associate member of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators and Kigali International Arbitration Center, KIACC, as well as an accredited mediator. Papias, can you go for...
Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you, the organizers, Ivan. Thank you, the speakers, Neill, Firas, the chairman of the youth. I'm very much delighted by the information that was communicated in the whole webinar. And I would encourage that the young engineers and the other committees will still be doing the same, because what we need to do, we need to have this information, like the information by GIACC, which is based on research, and it is providing a lot of information that will help us to make the world better. I encourage that these type of webinars are done several times. As the Anti-Corruption Committee of the World Federation of Engineering Organization, we have done a bit of awareness campaigns, and we are still encouraging people to participate and collaborate.
Okay. I think we're having a network glitch with Papias. Yes, Papias, you're back on. You can continue.
We are encouraging the youth, young engineers in all national institutions to adopt to the anti-corruption principles, to the best practice of the engineering practice. We understand that there are challenges, but again, when challenges are not communicated, they can never find solutions. So this webinar is one of the ways of providing solution to those challenges, and with continued collaboration, I believe that we will eliminate corruption, especially by using the materials provided by professional institutions like GIACC and FIDIC. This year, from last year, our committee decided to every year on the World Anti-Corruption Day, which was passed by the United Nations in 2003, that we will be providing a statement that will be shared and communicated through our member institutions within the World Federation of Engineering Organization. And I take this opportunity to encourage SAICE and the other institutions in different countries, especially for those institutions that members have attended this webinar. On 9th, we are going to circulate a statement that is based on the experiences of the committee members, which we believe it is going to raise more awareness on anti-corruption practices and activities. And by so doing, it is going to, it will be part of solving the problem of corruption within the sector of where the engineers and our professionals have their practices in. Without taking much time, I thank you very much. I thank the coordinators. I thank the speakers. I thank the moderator for having made a successful webinar. And do encourage that let's continue, because the process of making the world better, we need to have continuous and consistent mechanism of working and addressing the issues that our societies are facing. I thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Papias, for those closing remarks. I think we'll end the webinar here. And again, thank you so much to the panelists. Firas, thank you so much as our chair of Young Engineers Future Leaders, providing this platform and leading us to the future. Okay, I think we'll end it.
Thank you, everyone.
Enjoy your weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.